curious if we took Atij's discussion of anthropology of secularism, the idea that secularism is not just a principle, but is in its own right a formation of cultures and beliefs, and applied that concept to Professor Gorski's categories of missionary strategies, parachurch organizations. Would secularism not still have a chance to itself, have the ability to apply those kinds of strategies, build up those kinds of organizations, have the appropriate secular state relations, and still perhaps be able to adapt in the same ways and maybe make its own resurgence?
It could, I mean, they need to invent a new ideology, because sort of the two big versions of that, which were fascism and communism, are basically, for all, as far as we know, extinct. I mention them because those are, those are movements which really did build, a complex ritual life, kind of a fully developed, cosmology of one kind or another. Extensive networks of various kinds of, parachurch organizations, newspapers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Interestingly, to some degree, in response to an interaction with particularly Catholic kind of confessional movements during the 19th century, there's a lot of kind of interplay and interaction between those two. And interestingly, some of the few places where you actually find Protestants replicating that are places where they are in direct competition with both Catholic and kind of socialist movements. The Netherlands is the classic example of this, but you find this also to some extent within Austria, Belgium, and lesser degree some parts of Germany.
And I think there are actually these organizations. I mean, that in Turkey definitely there's this attempt to organize against the Islamists. There's a foundation to support modern life. That's one, for example. That's kind of has also charity functions, but definitely they want to propagate, kind of defend secularism against kind of a re-Islamization of public life in Turkey. And in Germany too, I mean, lots of the kind of immigrant organizations that were based in Turkey were actually nationalist and secular, and they did actually experience lots of tension with the Islamist organizations as they competed over kind of immigrants, to provide their primary kind of organizations. Although now that tension has ceased, and in the German context, the Islamic organizations were much more successful because they were also oriented around mosque communities, whereas the other organizations didn't have this kind of a. I mean, the religion provides a very kind of ready-made language, and for these organizations that enables them to much easier attract immigrant workers than, let's say, some of these other alternative organizations were, let's say, socialist, and so they didn't have the same kind of connection to the, I think, to kind of cultural idioms and languages that this kind of religious communal language did. Actually, these secular organizations gave up because they saw that they needed to collaborate with the Islamic organizations if they wanted to claim any kind of power or representation over immigrants, because their membership numbers were really low.
Just one very quick little follow-on, which is that there's a way in which at least liberal secularism is in some ways at a disadvantage in that kind of a struggle, in the same way that liberal Protestantism is, and for exactly the same reason, because of its extremely intellectualistic and non-ritualistic character. And I think that, I mean, that's both one of the things which is admirable about liberal secularism and liberal Protestantism, but also one of the things which sort of weakens them politically.
Members of these secularist organizations, do they tend to be born into it the way that presumably members of the religious ones are? Or are they people that come out of the religious ones, or are they sort of, well, what are they? Where do they usually come from?
Yeah, actually, I really don't know. That's an interesting question, what their family backgrounds are and what kind of environments that they come from. It's really kind of difficult to know. It's a good question.
Well, certainly was some of this. So, like, if you look at the late 19th century secular societies, in England in particular, they do actually try to, they have their own Sunday schools, which are supposed to be a kind of a rival to conventional Sunday schools, and they, to some degree, try to replicate, this whole sort of menu of different kinds of organizations and build up an associational life. And people, it is in that sense a kind of a creed, into which people are born and they pass on. We all kind of know about the red diaper babies, I think, or maybe only my generation knows about that, about, sort of 1930s, 40s activists and the ways in which they kind of passed on their political commitments and so on to their children. So, I mean, obviously that can happen, but, that's the best answer I could give.
Do they tend to be international? I mean, like red diaper babies, they're part of communism, and so it wasn't, but theoretically, like the Ataturk pin wearers, it's a very specifically nationalistic call to arms.
I mean, in case of Turkey, I don't know about Europe, but in case of Turkey, definitely there was this one generation, that was the early Republican generation, that saw itself as part of progress and a new Turkey. And they do come from certain backgrounds. I don't know what their family kind of background is necessarily, but they come, for example, teachers. I mean, this generation of early Republican teachers was really kind of invested in this kind of secularizing and westernizing identity, and there's definitely probably a continuation of those groups.